My father said, "Go live in the streets," and closed the door. He didn't slam it. That would have required a feeling he didn't have about me. He simply closed it, the way you close a drawer that no longer interests you. And I stood in the hallway of 2214 Cloverfield Drive with a roller bag and a duffel that held everything I'd been permitted to take on 40 minutes' notice. And I looked at what used to be my bedroom. The door was open. The walls were a pale sage green now, Cheryl's color, Cheryl's idea, a Pinterest board made physical. My desk was gone. The closet rod was empty. There was a ring light assembled in the corner, still in its packaging, waiting for her to arrive and claim the space she decided she needed for her content. I set my house key on the hall table. Then I set something else next to it, a photocopy of my professional certification, folded in thirds, my name printed clearly across the top. Chelsea Green, CFE, CAMS. I had a second copy. I always had a second copy. Nobody saw me do it. My mother was in the kitchen. I could hear the particular silence that meant she was listening, but had decided not to be present. I took my things and left. The motel on Murfreesboro Pike was the kind of place that charges by the week and asks no questions. The room smelled of industrial cleaner over something older, and the heater cycled on and off all night like a tired argument. I put my duffel on the luggage rack and set the roller bag beside the bed and unzipped it to get my laptop. The laptop was not there. I went through the bag twice. I checked the duffel. I checked the pockets of my coat. I stood in the center of that beige room and ran the sequence backward. I had packed the laptop. I was certain. I had laid it in the roller bag alongside the external drive and the secure phone, and I had zipped the bag, and then my father had told me I had 30 more minutes and I had not opened the bag again. My mother had been in my room while I packed. I had asked her to leave. She had left. I called my cell carrier and tracked the device. It showed an address on Gallatin Pike. I cross-referenced the address. A pawn shop called Metro Cash Exchange. Open until 9. It was 7:43. I drove my own car, which was, technically, registered in my father's name, a decision I'd made 18 months ago for reasons that were entirely strategic and that I had not yet needed to execute. That would matter later. Right now, I drove. The pawn shop had a green awning and bars on the windows and a man behind the counter who looked at me without expression. My laptop was in the display case. The tag read $180. I asked him where he'd gotten it. He said a woman had brought it in earlier that evening. He showed me the receipt, my mother's handwriting, her ID number, her signature. I paid the $180 and walked out with my own property. In the bag inside the case, I found a crumpled piece of paper that turned out to be the pawn receipt, which she had apparently left inside the laptop case when she packed it to bring here. A clerical error on her part, an evidence trail on mine. I photographed it in the parking lot and emailed the image to a secure server. The notification came at 11:14, a text from an unknown number, which I recognized immediately as my father's backup phone, the one he used when he wanted to say things he thought couldn't be traced to him. The text said that the Camry had been sold to a private buyer that afternoon for $4,200, and that I should have thought about whose name was on the title. I sat with that for a moment, then I called my mother's cell. She answered on the second ring. I asked her if she had known about the car. She said, "Chelsea, we needed the money, and that car was always ours in a practical sense, and I don't see why you have to make this into something bigger than it is." I said, "Okay." She said, "Your father is very hurt." I said, "I understand." There was a pause. She said, "You could call Cheryl, she's not trying to hurt you." I said, "I know," and I did know. Cheryl was not trying to do anything to me. Cheryl was simply a person who had never been required to consider whether her comfort came at someone else's cost. That was its own kind of character failure, but it was a failure of imagination, not malice. I had no particular feeling about it. I hung up. One tear. I am honest about the tear. I sat on the edge of the motel bed with the phone in my lap, and there was one tear, and then I blinked and it was done, and I opened my laptop. I work in forensic financial investigation. My clients are venture capital firms and private equity groups who need to know if the companies they're considering acquiring are what they say they are. I find the gaps between what people report and what is true. I am good at it. I bill at a rate my family would not believe, and I have never told them because there is a particular freedom in being underestimated, and I have valued that freedom for longer than I care to specify. I know how to find things. I started with the house, 2214 Cloverfield Drive. I ran a title search. The property carried a second mortgage taken out in 2019 and a third from 2021, and there was a notice of default filed in Davidson County in February of this year. They were 4 months behind. The house was, quietly, already in the process of being taken from them. The interesting part was what they were doing about it. I found a refinancing application in progress, not filed yet, still assembling, with a regional lender. I cross-referenced the named contacts. The loan broker was a man named Denton who advertised heavily on AM radio and had a disciplinary note in his state license record from 2017. The kind of broker who would not look too carefully at the income documentation. I called Mason Keller at 12:30 a.m. He picked up. Mason owed me a professional debt from a case 2 years prior in which I had found something and chosen, strategically, not to include it in my report to the client. He had been the attorney on the other side. He knew what the debt was. We had never discussed it explicitly. I need a shell, I said. Investment holding company, Nashville registered, plausible acquisition interest in residential properties. Timeline: 48 hours for the entity. I needed able to receive a refinancing application in approximately 2 weeks. A pause. This is for a personal matter. Yes. The debt is cleared after this. Yes. He said he would have the entity documents to me by morning. The shell was called Crestline Property Acquisitions, LLC. It had a registered address in a Class A office building downtown, a working phone number that rang to a voicemail Mason's assistant managed, and a website that had been professionally designed to look exactly as boring as a real holding company's website. We placed a small notice in a commercial real estate digest expressing interest in acquiring residential properties in the Cloverfield area. My father found it in 11 days. I had calculated 9, which meant his financial desperation was slightly lower than I'd modeled, or his internet search habits slightly slower. The inquiry came through the website form. Mason's assistant called him back. My father was, by the assistant's account, very eager to talk. The call lasted 22 minutes. My father explained that he owned a property in the relevant area that he might be willing to discuss. He mentioned, without being asked, that the home was in excellent structural condition. He did not mention the notice of default. Mason called me after. He's going to send the refinancing application. He wants Crestline to see his financial profile as a show of credibility. He'll send the income documentation. He said he would. He called it comprehensive. I said, let me know when it arrives. The application arrived as a PDF, 12 pages. I read it in approximately 4 minutes. The income section listed my sister, Cheryl Green, as a co-applicant and named her annual income as $84,000 from a media content company she had apparently incorporated 6 weeks ago. I pulled the corporate registration. The company had 1 registered agent, no employees on record, and no filed tax returns because it was too new to have them. The $84,000 figure was a fabrication, not an estimate, not a projection. A fabrication presented to a federally regulated lender as current income. That is bank fraud under 18 U.S.C. Section 1014. My father had signed the application. My sister had co-signed. My mother had signed the asset attestation page. I copied the document to 4 secure servers, one of which was located in a jurisdiction I will not specify. I printed 2 physical copies and placed them in an envelope in my laptop bag. I forwarded 1 digital copy to Mason with a note that said, "Proceed with the meeting." Mason arranged what he described to my father as an in-person consultation at Crestline's offices, a conference suite he had borrowed from his actual firm for the afternoon. He told my father that Crestline's principal was interested in discussing a potential acquisition and leaseback arrangement, which would allow my parents to remain in the home as tenants while resolving the foreclosure. He mentioned that it was a favorable structure for the right property. He mentioned that the principal had specifically noted the Cloverfield address. My father is a man who has spent 20 years believing that the right room will change his circumstances. A conference suite with a view of the Cumberland River and a woman at the desk offering coffee is exactly the kind of room he has always been waiting to be invited into. He would not read anything carefully in that room. Reading carefully would break the spell. All three of them came. I had not specified that all three should come. Mason had simply mentioned, when confirming the appointment, that it would be helpful to have all parties who had signed the refinancing application present. My father had arranged it. I waited in a secondary room while Mason walked them through the documents. The primary agreement was a property management and leaseback structure, 4 pages, standard boilerplate at the front, and on page 3, section 7C, a cross-default clause that incorporated by reference the refinancing application they had submitted to Crestline, and a deed-in-lieu provision held in escrow, triggerable in the event of any material misrepresentation in the application documentation. Mason had written it. It was legally clean. He read the first 2 pages aloud, summarized page 3 as standard cross-default and exit provisions, nothing unusual, and moved to the signature lines. My father signed. My mother signed. Cheryl signed in the co-applicant box, using the same looping cursive she'd used on birthday cards since she was 12. I came in when Mason texted me, a single period. I had dressed that morning with attention. Navy blazer, white shirt, the good watch. My hair was up. I looked like what I am, which is the version of myself I had never shown them. My father's face, when I walked in, ran through several expressions in quick succession. Confusion first, because I was unexpected. Then something dismissive, because dismissal is his reflex. Then something else, a recalibration, because the room and my clothes and the way I moved toward the head of the table did not match the version of me he held in memory. I set my laptop on the table and opened it. I did not say hello. I want to walk you through a few things, I said. This won't take long. The first slide was the deed transfer. I explained what a deed-in-lieu provision was and what triggered it. I explained what Section 7C of the document they had just signed meant in plain language. I explained that Crestline Property Acquisitions was mine, and that the deed to 2214 Cloverfield Drive would be transferring to it within 72 hours through the escrow mechanism they had just activated by signing. My father said, "You can't." "The second item," I said, and moved to the next slide. The bank fraud documentation took about 90 seconds to present. I did not editorialize. I read the relevant federal statute number. I showed them the income figure. I showed them the corporate registration date. I showed them my sister's signature. Cheryl was looking at the table. I said, "I have copies of this documentation on multiple servers. My attorney," I nodded toward Mason, who was standing near the window looking at nothing, "has a sealed copy with instructions for filing in the event that I direct him to do so, or in the event that I am unable to direct him." My father said, "This is extortion." I looked at him. Number extortion would be asking you for something I don't already legally have. I own the house. I'm informing you of facts. My mother had her hands folded on the table. She was not looking at me. I said, "You have 48 hours to vacate. I'll arrange for a moving service to be available at your expense, deducted from a relocation sum I've calculated." I put a single page on the table. The relocation figure was what remained after I'd subtracted the laptop, the pawn fee, and a conservative estimate of the vehicle's market value from a figure I'd decided on before I walked in. It was not generous. It was not punitive. It was arithmetic. I closed the laptop. "Mason will answer procedural questions," I said. I looked at all three of them briefly, the way you look at a column of numbers you've already totaled. Then I picked up my laptop and left. I did the walkthrough on a Thursday morning, before the moving service arrived. The house was quiet in the way that houses are quiet when the people who filled them with noise are already gone, a specific, heavier silence than emptiness alone produces. The kitchen still had a bowl in the drying rack. The living room had indentations in the carpet where the couch had stood for 20 years. My father had left a set of socket wrenches in the garage on a pegboard. I left them there. I walked upstairs. My old room was still sage green. The ring light was still in the corner, still in its packaging. Cheryl had apparently not taken it. I stood in the doorway for a moment. I did not go in. I did not repaint it. I pulled the door shut. At the end of the hallway was the table where I had left the folded certification notice on the night I was asked to leave. The table was still there. The paper was gone. I went downstairs, through the kitchen, and out the back door to the driveway. My new car was parked at the curb, a gray sedan, registered in my name, paid for in cash the week before from a dealership off Charlotte Pike. I had chosen it for its reliability and its complete absence of distinction. I liked it. I locked the back door with the key that was now legally mine. I walked to the car. I sat for a moment in the driver's seat without starting the engine. Then I started the engine, and I left.